As you guys know, I love talking about the polls, posting every now and then, and like to comment on your answers. I'm gonna do this today, but only with one question because that was. I have so many things to talk about that one, and especially about a few brands. So that question was judging based on history and watchmaking contributions. I believe the best brand is, and I gave you this in two batches. I gave you 8 brands in total. The first batch was Breguet, JLC, Omega, Rolex, and you guys picked first Breguet, second Rolex, third Omega, and fourth JLC. Now, I have a few things to say about this one. Breguet, we all know or should know all the contributions that they did to horology, from tourbillons to guilloche to phenomenal designs like the Breguet hands, Breguet numbers. We're talking watches that were used by legends of this planet. And I hear some people, but I'm very happy, first of all, that Breguet came number one. I believe that it's totally worth to be number one. And sometimes I get some critiques about Breguet, and I hear them on comments all the time. How Breguet looks old, Breguet looks this, Breguet looks that, they haven't moved on, they need to have a little more love and be brought to the 21st century. And I hear all that, and I can understand when this critique comes from, up to a point. And I say up to a point because you see brands like Rolex, and I'm bringing Rolex because Rolex is here. It's the second brand that you voted, and for a good reason. Rolex is master in marketing, excellent watches, amazing quality, timeless, many would say. But I want to talk as a designer now and just let you know that the icons that Rolex created were all in the 20th century. 20th century, late 19th century to 1970. That was the modernistic era. So Rolex had the benefit of creating most of their amazing designs during the modernistic era, which meant that form follows function. Less is more. Everything that you see about a simple watch, like the Explorer, for example, that everybody seemed to love so much, is the definition of modernistic, in the sense that the form follows function. It has 3 hands, no decorations, is as simple as it gets as a watch. And many of you guys call it purity. And that, I guess, can be true. But at the same time, it's very easy to produce in mass numbers. And this era of the time, the early, late 19th, early 20th century, is the explosion of industrial production. So we go away from traditional watchmaking, away from handmade movements and all those decorations that take time and energy, and we go to something simple and we can produce in great numbers. And of course, the finer the equipment gets, the finer the watches the product is getting, and Rolex mastered that. And it benefited from having that idea of less is more, form follows function. Breguet, on the other hand, did most of its masterpieces during the late Rococo era. So Louis Breguet, when he was a little kid and he was walking around, what he would see was elaborate designs with incredible detailed paintings, sculptures, handmade. And that's what he was trying to do with his own watches. Except for technical innovation, he was going for the designs that were around him, the kind of designs that were around him. A classic Breguet is an excellent Rococo design. And to blame Breguet for bringing its history with it after 3 centuries, and look back and say, oh, you stayed in your past. We don't say the same for Rolex. Why? Because Rolex is much more recent and its aesthetics are much more easy to our eye, because to this day, we still see it all around us. It's the easiest form of watchmaking, to make something simple. I'm not saying that it doesn't take technical innovation to get to the tolerances and the great qualities and materials. All of that goes without saying. But design-wise, to judge Breguet for their heritage, and by calling it outdated, if they were changing their designs tomorrow, people would say you moved away from where you came from your heritage. And it's them if you do, them if you don't. We've seen brands trying to move away from what they're known for. A good example is AP. They tried to move away from that royal oak and nobody cared. So same thing happens with the Breguet. People who buy Breguet buy it because it's Breguet, because it's unique. It doesn't look like anything else. Anything else that looks like a Breguet is because they copied Breguet. So there's that. Then you have Rolex, masters of marketing, incredible watches. The luxury market as we know it today would not be the same if it wasn't for Rolex. So I completely understand why Rolex is there. And of course, they make an excellent watch. Omega is a close third, but Omega under the Swatch group, I think, is suffering. I think the biggest drawback of Omega and Longines, in that matter, is the Swatch group. Yes, they help them with movements, they help them with everything they need, but in order to compete in an area where you have, with the Rolexes of the world, where they have their own vertical integrated manufacturing, and yes, they bought the movements, factories and all that, but we're not going to go into technicalities, what's in-house and what's not. What I'm trying to say is that the management is requiring them to hit certain numbers. The production numbers might be too high for what they're selling, and maybe that's why the secondary market is punishing them hard. Maybe that's why they have so many limited editions. Maybe that's why they keep bringing the same thing over and over with little tweaks. I mean, I think that Omega has an amazing history. It was already 70 years old when Rolex came up. It was already 70 years old. It was the watch to have. It was the Rolex of its time. And it continued to be like this until 1950s, somewhere there. So I think that Omega is incredible. It just needs to go away from the Swatch group. JLC, I'm surprised it's so low. I can't believe JLC is so low. JLC is the watchmaker's watchmaker. So I believe they have like 1,200 patents, in-house movements, patented in-house movements. JLC. They gave the movements to everyone under the sun, all the high-end brands you can imagine. JLC provided movements for. And they have some really cool watches. They look a little classic, but like Breguet, they're really old and they have their own heritage. So you can't ask for them to move away. I'm surprised with that 14%, honestly. And kind of disappointed, I have to say. Now, the second batch has the fan favorite, Seiko. Many of you, when you saw the first batch, said Seiko in the comments, not knowing that I'm going to come up with another batch. So, and I want to give some time before I post something else because I want to get the votes in. If I post, then you see the last post, you don't see the older one, so you might miss it. Seiko 31%, Vacheron Constantin 29%, Patek Philippe 27%, Longines 13%. I'm a little confused with this because with the Breguet case, we voted, I think, on history, innovation, a good mix. And here somehow Vacheron lost to Seiko. And I'm not surprised that Seiko is so high. I'm surprised with what kind of criteria, because the previous one was clearly, maybe it was innovation, I guess, because Vacheron, it's the real oldest brand in the world, continuous manufacturing, same machines in many cases, know-how that came directly. Like I talked about this before. I know I have many viewers that own Blancpain watches. Blancpain was closed. Equipment was trashed. There was nothing. And Mr. Biver, when took the brand, he had nothing. He says it in an interview. So he had to reinvent everything. Vacheron is continuing for almost 3 centuries straight. So that alone is incredible. Vacheron needs to be alive for as long as there's humanity, if you ask me. I'm going to go to Seiko later. Patek Philippe, I understand Patek Philippe is very high-end nowadays. But some of their biggest innovations is that they removed the key to wind a watch. So that was like 2 centuries ago. And then I think it was something about a chronograph, split-second chronograph, something like that. So not too much innovation. I guess very old brand indeed. Very high-end, great quality from what I know. I've seen a couple in person. I never had the opportunity to own one. But yeah, Longines was competing with Omega in the early 20th century for the best luxury mass-produced watch. Longines, I have the museum here in Washington, D.C. About the Air and Space Museum. And when you go and see some of the pioneers of flight, you see Longines watches in displays. Amelia Earhart and Mr. Lindenberg, they all wore Longines, and they needed them as instrument. Like that was a true instrument back in those days. So Longines, I think, is severely low. If I'm not mistaken, they created the column wheel chronograph. So that is another amazing innovation that everybody's still using today. Longines, I think, is the other brand that suffers under the Swatch Group. They decided that Longines needs to be under Omega. History-wise, Longines could compete with anyone. They created the first GMT watch. Omega created the first diver watch. And these brands are not left alone to do what they wish. They need to follow these big CEOs of Swatch Group. I really, really, really wish one day that they will be set free, because they both deserve to be a lot higher than where they are today. But even today, I think they deserve to be higher than where they are. Seiko. Now, Seiko. I truly believe with everything that Seiko has done. Some commented, one person commented, and I love that comment. He said that Seiko, with the quartz movement, was so innovative, depending on where you're from in the world, that the whole Swatch industry called it crisis. And I think that is an amazing quote. They created the first quartz movement, mass-produced quartz movement. They have the spring drive movement that still to this day many people hate. And they do all the polishing by hand to this day. They spend a lot of time working on their dials. Yes, could they have better bracelets? 100%. They sometimes have misalignments. They have everything, right? They cover everything from the Seiko 5 to the Creedors, they and everything in between. Grand Seikos, Prospects models, they are vertically integrated. They own everything. They produce everything, even their own lubricants. They are an amazing brand. And I will go as far to say that if Breguet was living today, he would try to create something like a Grand Seiko or a Creator, in the sense that Louis Breguet followed whatever was in fashion, design-wise, at his time, Rococo. He tried to be as innovative as possible with his movements, as accurate as possible with his movements, and bring the best that he can for timekeeping. And the only brand out of all of these brands here that is truly dedicated to be accurate in every way is Seiko. And I really dislike, I think it's a bad taste when I hear people saying it's not true horology if it's like a spring drive because it still has a quartz isolator, blah, 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 blah. Yes, it does. But you know what the thing is? It's like lashing against contemporary car makers for using contemporary tires, engines, materials, and not sticking to what horse and carriage had. The other brands are trying to make different versions of that horse and carriage. They take out every now and then wood and they replace it with titanium, steel. It might be carbon fiber. It can be many different things, but there's still a horse, and that's the movement with the silicon balance or whatever, hairspring, and a pallet fork that ticks, and there's a lot of sentimental value there. I get it. I have, most of my watches are mechanical, so I love it. But if you really want to talk about horology, which is really the art of keeping time, I think Seiko does it better than all of these brands. Very divisive topic, I know. In the end, though, I gave you this last one. I took the winners, and I asked you which one of these is the winner, Breguet or Seiko. 60% said Breguet, 40% said Seiko. And I get it. In a world where we don't need watches, we all have cell phones, we have nice quartz clocks on our cars, we have computers. The only reason to buy a watch is the emotional reason. So if you go for emotion, you might as well go for tradition. But in my head, I think that this should be 50-50 because Breguet is the legend of the past. It produced everything that is important to us today, or most of it. And Seiko just took that flame and moved it further. But that's all for today, guys. Let me know what you think about Breguet versus Seiko? Did you vote for any of the other brands? Or do you have another brand in mind that I didn't even include here? Thank you so much for watching. Till the next one. Ciao.